Good afternoon. I'm Ozzy Cullen, Event Coordinator at the Vegas Chamber. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to our third of a four-part webinar series, Going Back to Work by Matter Real Estate Group. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to explain some features of this call. In order to preserve high sound quality, we will be muting everyone on the call besides our presenters to make it easier for everyone to hear. If you are joining this call on the web or through the mobile app, you can ask a question by using the chat feature on the interface. We will ask your question on your behalf. In order to preserve time, we ask that you please keep questions brief, and we will be taking all questions at the end of the call. And now please welcome the Vegas Chamber's Vice President of Membership Development, Will Ochoa, who will introduce our moderator.
Thank you so much, Ozzy. Good morning, and thank you for everyone joining us today as we start the third session of a four-part webinar series entitled Going Back to Work in Partnership with Matter Real Estate. As we enter the recovery phase, it's important that we share with you the best practices and latest insights into reopening your business safely. Going Back to Work has hosted panelists that have shared their expertise in a variety of topics, from preparing to the workplace, the future of dining, to wellness and corporate culture. Before I introduce our program, I'd like to highlight a couple of chamber programs for you. The Vegas Chamber recently created an opportunity to support local businesses while honoring heroes. Our Switch to Kindness campaign gives you the ability to drive revenue to local businesses by purchasing a gift card. You may give the electronic gift card to a friend or colleague, or you can donate it to a first responder through our partnership with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. For more information, we are putting that information in the chat box, so you'll be able to see it there. We highly recommend that you support a local business. Any gift card that you have there goes directly to them. At the Vegas Chamber, we also believe that every business should have the opportunity to access information and resources, especially during this time. Because of that, we are giving away free memberships to small businesses through June 30th to help you have the latest resources that you need throughout this crisis. And we do have a pretty large crowd. There are a lot of non-members out there, so please, that information will be posted in the chat box. For those of you who are members, please share them with other businesses in the area. This is information that they don't want to miss. Now, with that, I'd love to introduce today's webinar entitled Your Brain on COVID, How Fear Will Prevent Your People from Doing the Best Work. This will share actionable insights on first steps in preparing your employees for the changes that COVID will make to their daily routine. Prepping them for these changes is essential to make sure employees feel empowered to deliver the best work. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Mr. Jim Stewart, the founding partner of Matter Real Estate Group. Jim became an entrepreneur because he needed something different than working for someone else. And ever since, he's led hundreds of transactions and over $2 billion in development during a 30-year tenure in real estate. He also co-founded Perch and was the Southern California Entrepreneur of the Year, amongst other accolades, and there are many. He founded Matter Real Estate in 2018 alongside his co-partners, where they have put their combined experience to use in making real estate matter. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn the conversation over to you.
Yeah, right now I have text probably blowing up on my phones, saying how ridiculous that sounds. So thanks, Will. I never really enjoy having people read like that for me. But hey, great. Welcome everybody from the Chamber. We have a lot to cover today, and I think the first thing to kind of cover off, Phil Dixon, who is actually on the panel, has a webcam issue. So we're gonna have his voice, which is more profound than most. So just imagine a very intellectual Oxford scholar, and we'll have Tom. But we'll get to those both in just a moment. So I want to start by saying good morning, and particularly to all of us on the West Coast. We have a distinguished panel that's on the East Coast and others from around the country. So for those of us out West, good morning. I know to a lot of my friends that I'm now virtually at least connecting with, good to be back. I'm sure many are looking and saying, is that really the same Jim? I learned just last night that Zoom and these webcasts add 10 pounds to your face, so I have that. My daughter also pointed out that in conjunction with the actual 10 pounds I put on during quarantine is my new issue. So we're going to get through that. We're on a 90-day intervention of life, and we're hopefully going to get back to our normal selves soon enough. But what really for me is rather insightful about this panel, and particularly this topic, is I had a chance to look into neuroscience and how the non-conscious mind works, And I by no means pretend to have the level of understanding that our panelists have, but it really did prove to be, incredibly enlightening to me to understand how the brain works and then how we can use that to form and shape our conversations and our empathy and compassion and awareness for how people behave. So we're going to use that. One of the most intriguing concepts I know of, really has a fundamental change in how I think about life, how I think about my relationships. And in this particular case, I think what it really, creates impact-wise, and I hope for all of you, is a chance to demonstrate, true leadership. And in this case, having visibility and being able to provide encouragement to our colleagues, to our friends, our peers, our employees, that is going to be, the defining piece of what comes next. And I don't think it's, too much to say that this almost becomes a chance to define your leadership. This crisis is very real. It's not a headline. It's not on news. And now that people are coming back to work, we're really going to, have a chance to show up or hide. And I think that becomes the choice of, leadership. So one thing I also want to point out, Phil Dixon, who, teaches me something every day, has pointed out that the brain does not like to ask questions and then wait for an answer. So we're going to do everything we can to see questions as they come in. You'll see on the GoToWebinar, as we have in the past, there's a dialog box that allows you to submit questions. So we'll try and keep a steady eye on those so that as questions come in, if I could break and see them, I'll try and bring them up and ask those questions real time so that your brain doesn't get worked up waiting. I thought this was also a great time to bring a quote that I just came across the other day, so I'm not going to pretend that this influences my life, but I thought it was perfect and apropos for this conversation. And this is a quote by Anne Frank, who says, "How wonderful it is that nobody needs to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." And hopefully, as we start to come out of this this mess we all find ourselves in, we're going to use this as a chance to really be thoughtful, perhaps more empathetic. But certainly, I know for me, I'm going to work very hard at being the version of myself that I think I am, and hopefully put that on display as the version of myself that I want others to see. So we're going to use that as our background for today. So before we go any further, let me introduce two of the smartest people I know. And I hope you also find a chance to learn from them the way I have for decades. Phil Dixon, particularly, who's a CEO of the Oxford Brain Institute and is the invisible voice that will be part of this dialogue today, has been in my life probably for 20 years. He'll probably say 15 of them I was a child, and maybe 5 of them I've somewhat learned. And we'll get to Phil in just a moment. And also Tom Rieger, who is the new relationship, and Phil was kind enough to introduce Tom and I. Tom has a fascinating background as the founder and CEO of National Business Innovations, another leading expert, published author, and national speaker around how the brain works, and particularly how it works on organizations. And the way you could frame this conversation today is think of Phil Dixon as being someone who works on the individual and helps people think about themselves, how leaders promote individual productivity and overcoming the fear of the brain. And Tom is more organizational. So we're going to break these into 2 pieces. How does the individual work? And then how does those individuals come together collectively to create a better organization? So with that, I am going to turn it over for a moment to both first Phil and then Tom, if you both would not mind giving our listeners a bit of your own background and the type of companies you help and the type of work you do.
Tom, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. As Jim said, I'm Tom Rieger. I actually represent 2 sister companies, NSI and NBI. NSI is strictly a national security government sort of a think tank. We do a lot of applied behavioral science type of work, so population dynamics, discourse analysis, forecasting, and so on. And then NBI is the entity that we use to serve the commercial world. And a lot of the work we do is helping companies better understand the human element of both of their customers, the environment they work in, helping to predict the future and change the trajectory. And on the government side, we help to better infuse the population, the voice of the people, into decision making, especially for the Department of Defense.
Great. Phil, I feel like I could probably give you an introduction, Phil, but maybe you'll do a better job.
Please go ahead. I'd love to hear. So I'm going to go the other way around. My background is was in computer science. I had a career in computer science, and I finished up running the IT for a small company out on the West Coast called Apple. Some of you may have heard of it. That was an attempt at an English joke, but I guess it fell flat.
We're all smiling here.
Oh, good. So I worked for Apple from 1980 to 1989. Which gives you an indication of my age. And I did work for Steve Jobs. And yes, if you want to hear any Steve Jobs stories, they're going to cost you a glass of wine each. I left Apple in '89, having spent the last 3 years doing leadership development. And that was my focus, and which is what I did in consulting for about the following 10 or 15 years, which is actually where I met Jim. And I got more and more frustrated that we didn't seem to be able to produce better leaders despite what we were doing. So very, very briefly, about 10 years ago, I did a master's degree in Oxford and was exposed to the neuroscience of the brain. And I realized that that was the pivotal thing that I was missing, is we could help leaders and members of teams, etc., understand their brain, then they could become better leaders. And so that's what I've been focusing on the last 10 years. Published a book about a year ago, another one coming up in about 2 weeks. Founded the Oxford Brain Institute about 1.5 years ago, and we're, as they say in England, off to the races.
Wow. So for all of my friends, they would know when I say that Phil is one of the smartest people that I've had the privilege of knowing. Now you know why. So maybe, Phil, I think a great place to start, and I think where my first kind of introduction to how the brain is organized in its most simplistic terms, came from an awareness of the triune theory and how the primal brain and the emotional brain and the conscious brain, really start to set up. If you could, for the benefit of everybody, in the way you explain it to me as almost in a juvenile term, let's start with how the brain works in its 3 most basic components, and how different parts of that brain can hijack our thinking and serve as a backdrop to how we make decisions.
Sure. So basically, Jim mentioned the triune brain. Triune is just a fancy word for 3 layers. And the bottom layer, if you can imagine a fist, if everybody on the listening in clenches their fist and holds it up, that's the very center of the brain. We call it the reptilian brain, basal brain, doesn't matter what you call it, but it's the thing that responds to really basic needs for us in our survival. Let me back up one step. The brain has got one purpose. The purpose is your survival. That's its primary purpose. It's evolved over a millennia. It's not about reproduction of the species. That's a secondary issue. Your survival is a primary issue. Third point will be play video games, but I guess that's right. But so really we're about survival, and the 3 layers of the brain look after your survival in different ways. The bottom, the central layer, the reptilian brain, looks after your protection. It makes sure that it's aware of all the things that might threaten you from your very existence. So that's things like physical safety, financial safety. It's about being treated fairly. It's all those things that trigger off the brain to want to feel secure and safe. The next layer is called the limbic system. It's like the gateway or the sentry to the emotional systems, and it's looking for threats to your relationships. So what might be happening, we're all social animals, and what might be happening as a threat or a reward to those relationships is handled by that second layer. And then the third layer is what's happening with regard to predicting what's happening. The brain works on the principle that if it can predict what's happening, there's a greater chance of it ensuring your survival. So you've got 3 layers: protection, The next layer up is participation, and then the third layer is prediction. And we can identify something like about 50 different types of threats which could fall under those three categories. And I'm happy to explain more about those as we go along.
Yeah, perfect. So, and Phil, I know I'm framing this up correctly, that above all else, the brain is going to respond to fear first. So as if I'm correctly describing this, the brain at a neural level, every fifth of a second, 11 million neurons are firing. And of those 11 million neurons, only 40 are reward receptors. The balance of all of our brain activity 24/7 is assessing our environment and asking a single question, am I safe? And so once I started to understand that, it helps explain a lot of other things. So what we are going through today is chronic uncertainty, and people are seeing images on TV of death, of tragedy, over sensationalized, but very, very real. And the brain doesn't know how to separate the two. So the brain is seeing itself threatened more than it's ever been in life, right? So maybe Tom and then Phil, you can follow on. Either one of you, how does the brain, what role does the primal brain play with dealing with this fear, and how is that hijacking what is otherwise should be rational? We're believing these headlines. I'm afraid to touch the handle of my car, and I'm the only one who uses it. What the hell's going on here?
So if you think about it, if you take what Phil said, that we have this part of our brain, there's the reptilian brain, that's survival and protection, and then the limbic system, which is the emotional part of our brain. That's actually where a lot of our decision making happens, even though we may not realize it. There was a great article written by a guy named Jonathan Haidt that was called The Emotional Dog and His Rational Tail, as well as the great book by Danny Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. But all that says we tend to make decisions based on emotion most of the time, and then convince ourselves we're being logical. But we do have a logical part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, that kind of happened later in our evolution. But here's the difference. The emotional part of our brain is always on. Think of a sentry at his or her post that's just pounded 30 cups of really strong espresso and is just so eager to help. Always on, always acting, always making decisions quick. Find the information, form the team if I have to, and act. But sometimes we have to take a step back and say, well, wait a minute. What is this really telling us? And that happens in the prefrontal cortex. But getting back to your question, Jim, the problem is stress, fear, even trying to juggle too many tasks tend to shut down that ability to be more logical. It tends to shut down the activity happening in the prefrontal cortex. So even though we think we're being logical, if we're in a fear state or a threat state, a lot of times we're going to just simplify, unify, justify, and go. We're instead of taking a step back and more carefully evaluating and substantiating if we have the right idea.
Yeah. Phil, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and so let's go back and take a look at the types of threats that we're facing at the moment. And go back, if you look at the three layers, and what Tom was basically saying, when we get under threat, what actually happens is a release of a compound, a hormone in the brain called cortisol, whose job is to actually enhance that sentry's ability. So it effectively gives it another 10 cups of coffee. And it closes down the prefrontal cortex. So now we're being driven by that rapid responsive part of the brain. And if you take a look at the types of threats that we're facing at the moment, first of all, there's the real danger of the virus itself. And that, again, the reptilian brain goes, I could die. And it's absolutely truthful, you could. But what also happens is that the other senses that we're talking about, where we listen to emotional activity and predictive activity, emotionally, many of us are desirous of being with other people. By the way, look what's happened. We've been forced into social isolation, which for some people is fine. If you don't need to be around other people or you've got a great family to support you when you're at home, it's not a big deal. But for those people who really want to be with other people and maybe don't have quite such a conducive environment at home, that's another layer of stress. Now add to that all of the ambiguity. When are we going to be allowed to get back to normal? The uncertainty, the volatility of what's going on. There is almost every one of those 50 threat potentials are all being triggered at the moment for pretty much every one of us.
Okay. Doesn't paint a great picture. So we know people are scared. It's going to be chronic. It's not just going to magically go away anytime soon, and even perhaps after the vaccine. In promise to our viewers, I'm going to try and actually take on real time a question, Phil, because I think this is perfectly suited for you. So I just received a question from an employer who has a small team described as closely knit. And their question is, look, the empathy is there. I know people are coming back, but they're going to have two things they're trying to deal with. What is my role as a leader to help them reintroduce themselves to the workplace and the function they perform for my company? But now there's this new introduction around their mental health. And how do we check in with them emotionally? And Phil, this is perfect for you because I know your wife, Kathy, is a very accomplished human resource director. How do you answer that question?
Slowly and carefully. And so the first thing I'd say is, for people who are in leadership positions and people coming back, be honest and address the issue. Don't sort of try and hide it under the rug. Turn around and basically say, yes, we're all going through this. We are all under tension. And let's talk about what the impact of that, and dig down beneath the typical water cooler conversation, and actually start to address and have the leaders become a little more vulnerable and turning around and say, this is what's going on for me. This is how I'm feeling. And I would encourage all leaders that have listened to this to actually take a look at the triune brain and take a look at the types of stress, the types of threats that are putting our brains under threat, and just admit to it. Admit the fact that I'm scared. Admit the fact that it doesn't feel fair that a friend of mine died of COVID-19. Fairness, by the way, is a big driver. Fairness triggers the same neural circuitry in the brain as disgust. And disgust is a fundamental surviving emotion. If you weren't disgusted by the sour milk a million years ago, then your genes aren't in the gene pool. So all of those things are getting triggered, and just be honest. Don't try and bravado your way through. Don't try and be macho about it. Just be honest about what's going on and encourage that level of honesty in all the conversations with your staff.
So I'm going to let you touch that one as well, Tom. But if you feel, if I'm hearing you correctly, we're all really on a human experience together, and empathy, awareness that everybody has their own journey and is dealing with their own pain and struggles. Simply the acknowledgement of that, and also the fairness equation seems to be that if I also tell you that I'm also afraid, I also am trying to overcome these obstacles, that sounds like that goes a long way in kind of closing that gap, so that at least your organization starts to believe we're in this together, right? And so maybe Tom, organizationally, how do you frame that same conversation maybe against a larger organization?
Well, it's really up to leaders to set the tone, as Phil said, but there's a few things to keep in mind when dealing with your team. The paradigms have changed, and they've changed pretty dramatically. And we all come to work and are interpreting our environment, interpreting information really along several dimensions, but three things to keep in mind. One, practices become ingrained. So things that, and there's two dimensions of this. The first is things that were just part of doing business before that you may have in your mind as a leader may or may not apply in this new reality. A great example, I call these ghosts. They're practices that used to be the right thing maybe and just have outlived their purpose. If you think about when someone sneezes, what do we say?
Yeah,
we say, bless you. Right. The reason why, there's a couple of theories, but the reason that I tend to believe is that that phrase originated during the peak of the Black Plague, another pandemic. And Pope Gregory I told people that for protection, they should pray for the souls of those who are showing symptoms. And the first symptom was sneezing. And so we still do things without thinking of it to this day, even though the reason is no longer there. So I'd say be careful of practices that you may have to adjust or may no longer apply, and then be open to new ones as you move to the future. The second area are the filters we use to interpret information. When we're in a threat state or a fear state, we're really subject to imposing our own fears on someone else's intent or the information they're providing. You know, when I dropped my son as a freshman at University of Iowa a couple of years ago, you know, I'm a nervous dad, you know, dropping my son to college for the first time. So that protection area that Phil talked about was firing away. And we were walking down the street, him and his roommate, and I hear them saying behind me, "Wow, look at all the bars here." And I turned around, he's only 18, and I'm not naive, but still, I turned around in full dad mode. And he's looking at me like I'm crazy. He was holding up his phone, looking at the strength of his Wi-Fi connection and talking about those bars.
Yeah.
But the point is that, you know, we had to be very careful that if we're in a threat state, we're going to be looking for signals around that threat and interpreting them emotionally. So taking a step back and trying to think logically, what's the objective we're trying to achieve? What's the decision we need to make? What information do we need to make that decision, and how do we get that information, instead of going the other way around and saying, this is flying at me, what do I do? It is a really important way to go. And the third thing I would say is be careful how you bucket information and try to be objective. You know, if you think about, if you go to a doctor or dentist's office, of course you expect them to wear a mask. And yet, you know, there's pushback happening in grocery stores in some cases. No one has a problem with no shirt, no shoes, no service, but one more piece of cloth over your mouth somehow is bucketed as something different, even though my not wearing it could put the person I'm dealing with in a threat state, which would then cause them to not make the best decisions, cause them not to necessarily treat me as an equal team member, as that part of that in-group. So little things, little messages could really trigger that fear state, which not only leads to bad decisions, but makes it very hard for you as a leader to be viewed as part of that team, to be on their side.
Yeah, perfect. So look, I got a great question, which is also a perfect segue into where I wanted to go this next. So, you know, we're going to quickly start running against a time barrier here. So there's another practice in neuroscience known as a somatic marker theory, which we all know, you know, at least in the neuroscience side, it basically creates a searing event. So think about it as a breadcrumb trail of memories that the brain works at uses at a non-conscious level that helps us establish, history and then new operating beliefs off that history. So what we've all kind of gone through, this is chronic. It is forever changing the way we view health and safety forever, right? So this idea that if I hear new normal again, I'm going to lose my mind. I mean, this is normal. People are going to be afraid. People are going to deal with fear for a long time. And because this has longevity, this next question tied in perfectly to it, which is, one of the viewers wrote in that, when this kind of came out, we had this first stay-at-home, orders. There was a level of adrenaline, and everyone took on the mission at hand. And it was, to me, it reminded me of New Year's Day. I'm gonna work out. I'm gonna, but by January 30th, you're kind of like tired, like, okay. So there's how do you help leaders and organizations who are now starting to deal with this new onset, which I find ironic as well, as people talk about, oh, the work from home strategy is here to stay. Seriously, I mean, people are fatigued by it. It was fun to be around in your pajamas for a while, but now it's just obnoxious. I felt good putting on a shirt and coming in the office. But look, there's still a lot of safety issues here for people to deal with. How are leaders and organizations going to continue to motivate and push their teams when the fatigue now is setting in and the mission creep has happened, where it was flatten a curve and now everyone's like, that happened, but now I'm just stuck at home and I'm tired. how do companies innovate and produce results in that type of environment? And either one of you could take that little nugget on, because I wouldn't want to touch it.
I'll take it on first. And first of all, one of the things we know about the brain is, although our brains are all very similar or the same in how they're structured, every one of us behaves differently. And if you can think of, I mentioned that we've got 50 different things that threaten us. And for some people, they get highly threatened by each one of them. For some people, they don't. So if you can imagine 50 combinatorial effects, it's a huge number, and it's bigger than there are populations in the world. So one of the things is for leaders to understand what it is that triggers, first of all, themselves, but what is it that's going to be triggering everybody else? There's no one size fits all. If any quotes expert says, here's the answer, run the other way, because every one of us needs a different answer to what's going to satisfy, what's going to motivate us, what's going to make us individually feel safe. So that's the first one, is you make certain that you, as a leader, you're finding out what it is that's actually threatening each of the individuals in your team. Now, clearly, if you're in a huge organization, you can't do it all, but if you're in a smaller organization, you can. I want to add on a couple of things that you, both Tom and Jim, you both said, and that is the need for empathy. Empathy comes out of the prefrontal cortex. And as Tom said, when you're under stress, when you're under threat, that's the part of the brain that actually gets slightly closed down. So if you can actually understand what's going on in the brain, and you can turn around and say, wait a minute, I might not be being as empathetic as I should be in this situation because of how my brain's reaction. So the ability to take stock of that, step back for a second or two and go, oh, let me rethink, let me reframe how I might approach what's going on.
Yeah, I'd like to add just a little bit to that. I agree with everything you said, Phil. And I would argue there's actually two competing threats that we're dealing with. One is physical safety, and the second is financial security, because at the same time, people want to go back to work, right? People want to resume their careers and get on with their lives. But if they feel physically threatened, that's got to come first. So part of the responsibility of a leader in an organization is, if you are bringing people back, if you're permitted to do so and you're ready to do so, you have to make sure that your staff feels safe. And that's something you can't compromise, because if they feel unsafe, getting them to concentrate on anything else isn't going to happen. But once that's the case, then you've got this other very real threat of my financial future. Look at what's happening with unemployment. Look at how many companies have had to close their doors because of this. So first, that's kind of the bottom layer of the pyramid, is creating an environment, making sure that they know you have their back and you're not going to put them in any position to compromise their safety. Within those constraints, how can we rebuild our business and do it in a way that everyone participates? So it's that balancing act that I think is the key to answering your question.
Well, it actually, one of my colleagues here earlier today, pointed out. So obviously we're, a real estate development company. So I don't pretend that we understand, all the mental health issues going on. But he made the comment, which I think is rather, insightful, that in our world, almost cliche was location, location, location. And now going forward, as we think about real estate and the built environment, the new priorities are safety, safety, safety.
Yeah.
Right. And that led to your point, Tom, that until people can feel safe, it's simply going to be impossible for them to do productive work and start to deal with some of the mental health that we think is coming. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point.
Yeah. Go ahead, Phil. I can hear you. Ready to go?
Yeah, if I can add something there is, if someone feels a physical threat, the brain lights up in 5 places. If someone feels an emotional threat or a social threat, like we're talking about now, the brain lights up in exactly the same 5 places. But to the brain, it doesn't distinguish between you're saying, well, you're not part of this group anymore, to actually you intending to slap it around the face. The brain does not distinguish between the two. So, and it doesn't require much in the way of social threat, emotional threats, any of those, for the brain to feel actually physically threatened, and therefore start to close down and not be anywhere near as efficient as it should be. So that sort of every loop we look at reinforces the create safety for the individual, physical safety and psychological safety.
Okay, so well, when you put it in that context, the idea that a physical threat against my life now is sitting in this dark background running an endless tape, and then promoted by CNN and every other news media outlet on a regular basis. No surprise that we're starting to walk around in a bit of a fog, and it's getting hard. The adrenaline's wearing off. We now are trying to deal with this very difficult task. It's time to get back, time to work, but we're still afraid. Right? I mean, in essence, for our life. And you're asking me to come back to work, right? So I can start seeing it. Another question that popped up along the, this particular line of reasoning and thought: should organizations be thinking about this, as a training mechanism? Should they be doing, online or in-person videos to help, and should be seeking out leadership and other people to help bring this level of education? Because I know for my companies, we never thought about helping our people overcome the threat of life and limb, that's been in front of us for so long. So how are organizations going to, how would you both coach a company right now to start helping their people overcome these emotions, or at least addressing them?
So Phil, you want me to start with that one, and then you can jump in?
I'll address it in a number of ways, and some of them are going to sound a little strange. First of all, is fostering the conversation. Make it okay to have the conversation. I think is going to be the single most important thing, so that it's okay for me to say to my coworker, God, I'm scared. I'm gonna stay at home tomorrow. I don't like this. That's perfectly okay. The second thing is, and believe it or not, I'll bring this back, and it's encourage people to sleep. It turns out that sleep, stress, and positivity are in direct relationship with each other. So if you want people to actually feel a little more positive, they're not going to do so if they're under stress and or they're getting not enough sleep. So finding out the optimum amount of sleep that you as an individual need and getting that on a regular basis turns out to be desperately important for our physical health and for our mental health. It's sort of a foundational principle. Nothing else is going to matter. If you're not going to get enough sleep, you're still going to be stressed. And then start doing things that we know actually help to relax the brain. Take on, do that hobby you've been putting off for a while, or sit around and have an in-depth conversation with the family, or pick up a musical instrument and start playing it, or go out jogging. There's about probably a list of 40 or 50 things I could do, I could say like that, all of which are going to help in the background. So, and again, leaders tend to try and dismiss the softer side of things. It's not a time to do that. It's a time to honor it and address it.
Yeah. And I would add to that in a couple of ways real quickly, if I can. Not everyone is going to have the same response to the same threats, as Phil said. You have to treat people as individuals. And in addition, as I was saying before, when the emotional brain takes over, that makes us vulnerable to blind spots. So, there's actually working with Phil, we've developed a combined assessment that looks at individual threats for people and what they feel most threatened by, and what blind spots they're most vulnerable to. Is it more in how information's processed? Is it more in how I deal with others? Is it more in how we actually make a decision and act? But until you know that, as a leader, you're shooting a little bit in the dark. So whether you do a formal assessment, you just have a dialogue with your team, I think it's important to understand the dimensions along which you can act and you should act. And there are tools out there to help.
Look, so it turned out rather timely. Our team, just before COVID had started, ironically enough, we had our kind of annual strategic, meeting, and everyone knows me, knows I'm one of the soft tissue kind of guys. So I brought in, ironically enough, a Buddhist monk to work with our team to talk about mindfulness and meditation, which for me is one of my daily rituals. But it sounds like everyone can find a ritual. You use the example, Phil, of a hobby or going out for a run or notes of gratitude. But these are all, in essence, practices of mindfulness and allowing the brain to focus on something other than what we're seeing on TV every day. So immediate tools. I think the next thing that's kind of come up is all of us now are on this individual journey, and we're using empathy and just awareness of our coworkers and our team members, that they just an awareness that they have their own journey, and that it's not to say their journey is like ours, but unique to them. Why is it that in the same line, some of us, like I have a business partner, Kevin Burke, who's like a Navy warrior coming back at this. But there's other people, myself included, that sometimes I'm just a little bit still afraid, and I look at myself and think, God, is he just more courageous? He would say yes if he's listening right now, but that's probably not true, right? I mean, we all have our own individual journeys. So why is it that it's different for one person versus somebody else? And don't say it's bravery, Phil. I don't want to hear that, because Kevin will never let me forget.
I won't go down that track. Tom, do you want to take that first, and I'll jump in?
Sure. So, there's some great work done by a dear friend of mine who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, named Shane Lopez, on types of courage. And what he found is there's multiple types. There's physical courage, which is, I guess, somewhat relevant now that there's a physical danger. But the ones that are really relevant to the workplace are moral courage and vital courage. So vital courage is that survival instinct that we've been talking about, that part that sits in the reptilian brain and the limbic system. And that's, what do I do for myself in terms of my physical safety, advancing my career, paying my bills, making sure my family's okay, all those things that are kind of about me. And then the other piece of that is moral courage. Moral courage is completely different, and it even resides in a different part of the brain. It's in the prefrontal cortex, which again is, the lazy part of our brain that's sitting on the couch eating a bag of potato chips. You got to drag into the fight when you need it to engage. Moral courage is about an idea. So think of it this way: as vital courage is what's best for the employee. Moral courage is what's best for the company. Unless you very deliberately line those things up, you're not going to get the result you want. So if you create an expectation that an employee is going to do something that may even hurt them, or there's not a clear benefit, good luck.
No.
Conversely, if you give people a chance to game the system and emphasize that what's in it for me at the expense of the moral part of it, that could sometimes happen too. So the key is to game the system. Set up your incentives, your recognition, so that when someone does something that's good for them, that's the behavior you want. So make sure you're very deliberate about how you recognize, what you recognize, and think about the spider web, right? I mean, every decision you make is going to impact people behind you, in front of you, around you, and within your team. So don't just think about, okay, is this going to put this person or that group in a rough spot if we implement this program? Think about everyone around, and then invite them in and say, okay, here's what we think we need to do, but we're worried it's going to impact you this way. How can we work this out so we all win? So understanding that what's best for the company, what's best for the player, those two different types of courage, and needing to line them up is really critical. I had the chance to spend a couple of days at sea on the Nimitz a few years back, and that's a physical danger environment, but everyone I spoke to, no matter who, said, what I do is the most important thing on this ship. It didn't matter if it was the pilots, didn't matter if it was the mechanics or the people serving food in the mess hall. Everybody knew the mission and their part in it and why they were doing what they were doing. So I think that's part of the key to answering your question, Jim.
Great. Phil, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think I was going to say some of the same thing, but I think Tom did it far better than I could. So thank you.
So it's interesting that you use a military example there, Tom, because at least I think organizationally, when we were given the mission of flatten the curve, we all understood that, and that gave us, to me at least, it gave me an objective. It said flatten the curve. I understand that it's easy to contextualize. saving lives, saving hospitals, but we're no longer there, right? So we're now on the other side, but I was kind of hoping there'd be some mental relief to all this. And I'm now, so I was out, I actually went on my first business trip yesterday, first time in a while, and I was engaging with other people, and a question came in, which was, perfect timing, because coincidentally, I found myself not being the best version of myself because I didn't know how to react to them and vice versa. So how should organizations think about telegraphing or messaging or just creating awareness for the people they do business with, that when you come to us, you're still safe, right? Because it's one thing we're talking about, how do we keep our employees feeling that safety is a priority, but how do you externalize that messaging to people you're going to do business with? And if I see another ad on TV for a plumbing company telling me that their people practice social distancing and wear booties, that's not that's cute,
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. So how does a typical company let their vendors, their partners, their clients know it's okay to come see us?
Well, I think there's certain levels to that. One is just the basics, that you're assuring people that yes, you're taking safety seriously, you're keeping things clean, but don't discount the importance of why they're coming to see you. So what's the mission that we're all in together? Why would your customers come to see us? And then how can you deliver that in a way that's safe? Because I think, using your example, the plumber's great. It's flipped backwards. It's like the purpose of coming to us, or a plumber coming to your house, is so that they'll stay away from you and wear masks. No, the purpose is to do something, but do it in a safe way. So it's flipping the script a little bit and leading with the purpose, right? Leading with the mission. And same thing internally. Why are we all coming to work? What's our mission? And there's a famous quote that anyone who's taken physics has probably heard from Aristotle, that nature abhors a vacuum, right? So if you don't set that mission, guess what? People will make up reasons why they think you're doing something. And so take control of the script, provide, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's why it's important, and secondly, here's how we're going to deliver it safely. That would be my advice.
Yeah, and I know, Phil, you'd probably jump in, but before you do, because we're quickly going to run out of time, and it's actually working well because I see great questions coming in. I could hopefully do a decent job of threading them into our dialogue. So this fits into the same line of thinking, and this also happened to me yesterday. So a question just came in, said, look, we're trying to tell people that you're safe, you're free of the possibility of harm. I'm okay, yet I have a mask on my face, which visually is telegraphing you be worried about me, and I'm visually seeing somebody else that's also wearing a mask, a constant reminder that I'm living in this unsafe environment. And so this is complicated. How do you perhaps suggest to me that it's okay, yet for the foreseeable future, people are going to be wearing masks, which is telling me you're anything but okay. You might be toxic.
Bill, you want to take that one?
Yeah, both of you can run.
I'm not sure I've got a really good answer to that one, because we are going to be wearing masks, and it's not just the fact that you're wearing a mask which messages that you might be unsafe, but what it also does is it hides all the facial expressions that you're giving, which support the veracity of your word. And so we're losing yet another sort of set of dimensions on how to interpret the fact that that person who's telling me that they're perfectly safe, I'm not able to see the small nuanced muscles twitch around their face to know whether that's true or not. So yes, it's a double issue. And so we've got a colleague. Can I carry on for just a minute?
Please do. Yes.
We've got a colleague who has actually already started to address that a few months ago. And what he's doing is saying to so people, when you're going to go out to a client, or you're going to have a vendor coming into you or something like that, think of it on the how can you keep them protected, how can you keep them participative, and how can you keep them in a predictive state, all of it from a positive point of view. So it's not just about am I physically safe? Am I emotionally safe, and do I understand why I'm here and what's going to happen? So the more you can actually explain it in terms of the 3 layers of the brain, the greater the chance of ameliorating the position for the person that's coming in through your front door. Is it going to work all the time? Probably not.
Yeah. Well, Phil, again, you touched on another thing. Exact experience I had yesterday, where we were engaged with a new business client. Everyone's wearing masks, and I left feeling like I still don't know anybody there, even though only a portion of their face was covered. And there's a lot of science around kind of microfacial recognition, and that non-conscious, we're picking up on all these nonverbal cues and micro level details that are telegraphing to our brain what's really going on, even though consciously we think we understand what's going on. Again, lost in the scheme. I'm a big proponent that people are not going to sit at home. We need to be around each other to truly interpret at a non-conscious level, collectively, holistically, what the communication is. So we'll see how that plays out. The power of it, though, was exemplified to me in a book around neuroscience and how we frankly make decisions. So I won't go into that, but this, hopefully for people watching, this will give you the power of how the non-conscious mind really is making decisions. In this case, they took professional hitters, Major League Baseball players, and showed them the pitching routine filmed of Major League pitchers, but at the release of the ball, they stopped the film and tested the subjects and Major League hitters to point on the batter's box where they thought that ball was going to go without ever seeing it released. So simply watching the movements of the pitcher, stop shot at the ball, and then said, where's that ball going to go? And with over 90% accuracy, they were able to pinpoint within the strike zone where that ball was headed. And that to me is an amazing indication of the power of how our brain really works. They took it one step further, and now we're going to turn into some positive things before we run out of time. They said, and how fast does the brain make a decision? So the speed of the ball, the hitter has 0.25 seconds from when the release happens to when they hit the ball, when they make physical contact. The bat takes 0.20 seconds to get around. So what they're saying is that a hitter in Major League Baseball has 0.05 seconds to determine whether or not they're going to swing, which is, I mean, that tells you how fast the non-conscious mind is working. So let's use our last 7 minutes of time here, and either one of you can choose how you want to approach it. But Phil and Tom both, take a few moments. What's the good? Let's end this with, what can people take out of this experience? Say, here's what tomorrow reimagined can look like, and why it actually could be a very positive, transformational event for us societally.
You want to go first, Tom?
Sure. I'm very hopeful. I think, like any major event, some of it may bring out the worst in us in some respects, but I've seen an awful lot of the opposite. I've seen people coming together, neighbors sewing masks for others, a lot more focus on charity and helping people, understanding, donations to food bank, things that have to be done. So I'm hoping is that, maybe we can start to bridge some of the divides now that we're in this fight together. This virus doesn't care, what background you are, how you're going to vote in an election. It doesn't care. It's universal. So I'm hoping some of that, and beyond that, I really believe the worst is past us. My heart goes out to everyone who has lost their jobs, but we are a very resilient species. We're a very resilient country. And I have every faith that we're going to get back through this. This is not the worst threat we've faced either, and it feels like it's going on forever. It's just been 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
Think about that. It just hasn't been that long. And I think by this time next year, yes, I do believe there will be some behaviors that will be completely different, but I think life will get back to normal. It's going to be a different normal for sure. But we'll get through it. The curve is going down, and we keep doing the right things. It'll keep going that way.
Yeah, great.
Phil? I'd say 2 things. First of all, Marshall Goldsmith, who's reckoned to be one of the best coaches in America, wrote a book some time back called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," and I think that's probably epitomized at the moment. What got us to this stage, we're going to have to change. So the brain doesn't like change, but as leaders, we're going to have to be the ones that bite the bullet and go into change. And what we have is, as leaders, we have the opportunity to be very careful about the words we use. The words we use can drastically impact the recipient's feelings and threat on them. So if I say to you, Jim, don't get angry, what do you think the brain hears? It hears the word angry. But if I turn around and say, Jim, be calm, what the brain hears is calm. So we, by very closely focusing on the words that we use, we can actually direct the positive side of where we're going rather than the negative. Very early on, there was a phrase that kept being used, was shelter in place. Guess what people associated that with? That is way more negative than work from home, which has got a lot more positive connotation to it. So the words we use as leaders, we can actually choose positive words which will actually diminish or will reduce the threat to people, rather than continue the use of the alarmist type of words that you're seeing around at the moment.
So, and the power of those words, Phil, I totally agree and understand. So let's talk about that in context of, as we kind of close this out. This is the Vegas Chamber. You have a community that has dealt with more than its fair share of tragedy. They've risen above it. I have no doubt this is going to be another great example of a city innovating and leading the way toward hospitality. The very premise of Las Vegas is built on gathering of people and sharing experiences together. So how would you encourage, how would you give courage and help people, lead with courage going forward, specifically to Las Vegas and specifically to a town that, it was just a short time ago that they dealt with October 1 events. They had the collective empathy of a larger world. Today, they're back in the front line and people are saying end of Vegas. We know that's nonsense. But what's next for Vegas? How do they get out in front and how do they lead in this kind of new chapter?
It's a complex question, Jim. And I think it really comes back, though, to what can you do within the constraints you have? And it's all the things we've been talking about. It's, trying to make sure that as you make decisions, you're not falling prey to these emotional fueled blind spots that may lead you into doing the wrong thing. It's making sure you set a clear mission and objective that, the benefit you're providing to the world in coming to Vegas is the first thing, and you're delivering that safely. So I think it's changing your message, using the right words, as Phil said, is absolutely critical, and taking care of your people, because without them, there is no experience, there is no Vegas. So making sure, again, they're clear on what they need to do, that you have their back, and that they're safe in doing it.
Great. Phil, big last hurrah encouragement here.
I wish it was a big last one, but it's certainly one that you and I have spoken about before, and that's put the choice or the decision in the hands of the recipient. Don't make too many decisions for them. Give them choices. The brain loves a sense of choice. Do I get the option to sit 6 foot apart? Do I get the option to sit 8 feet apart or 10 feet apart? What's important to you? Things where people get the choice and they go, okay, now I'm going to choose this, rather than being told to do. I think that you've got an opportunity there in Vegas to actually encourage leaders, encourage service offerers to actually get more and more into tune with the people their clients, and give the clients the choice.
Yeah, great. Yeah, autonomy. It sounds like what you're describing there.
Oh yes, why not?
Yeah, I grabbed that. So I think that's good. That was a fast, 45 minutes. Will, I don't know if you want to pop on with any, last, remarks. I will say next week we're bringing in, 2 additional panelists. I'm like, I'm part of the chamber now, Will. So, but specifically, we're going to talk about how do you maintain your culture with no hugs allowed. So it'll be another great, pair of insightful speakers. We'll announce those later today. Let me just say again to both Tom and Phil, always a pleasure having the 2 of you and sharing your information. With that, I'll say thank you, and then Will, I'll leave any last remarks to you.
Jim, thank you so much. Tom, Phil, you guys have been amazing. The comments coming in that this was a great discussion. Someone said the panel is A+++. Thank you so much. For everyone on the call, thank you for being here. This recording will be available a little bit later to you. With that, I want to wish everybody a happy Thursday and a great weekend coming up. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, thanks, Will. Bye. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.